already capable of loading your favorite PS4 and PS5 games, but now you can also have the option to boot into Linux and use it to play all of your favorite PC games and play them online without a PSN subscription. Plus, you can also access your favorite games from other consoles through the use of emulation, like PS3 games, for example, also Xbox 360 games, Nintendo Switch games, and many more. So strap in, because I'm going to show you how to get this all set up and running on your PS5 in this full tutorial, and we'll also look at what kind of performance we can get by testing out some PC games and emulators once we get Linux up and running on the console. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So this comes to us, of course, from The Flow, who has done some incredible work in getting this going. So currently, PS5 supports firmwares 3.0 to 4.51. Those are the currently supported firmwares. We're hoping that 1.x and 2.x firmwares will also get support, because they should be compatible once support is added. And then, of course, also firmwares up to 5.x may also get added in the future with KLD load. But for right now, with this initial release, it's 3.0 to 4.51 that are supported. Also firmwares 4.0 and above of M.2 support, so you can also install Linux to an internal M.2 drive if you're on 4.0 to 4.51. And of course, you can check what firmware you're on by going into the settings, scrolling down to System, System Software, and Console Information, and you can see I am on firmware 4.03, which is one of the compatible firmwares. So anything from 03.00 to 04.51 are currently supported with the initial release. So for the requirements, you need a USB drive to install the distro, even if you plan to install it later to the M.2 drive, and it must be at least 64 gigabytes in size. It would be better also if it's an SSD for faster transfer rates, and you'll also need a USB keyboard and mouse. I would also recommend a USB hub for more USB ports, which definitely comes in handy. Now, a couple of other requirements that this has: we also cannot use the inbuilt networking on the console. The support has not been added for it. That means the Ethernet port and the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth modules will not work under Linux, so you'll need to use a USB adapter, so a USB dongle for Bluetooth, or a Wi-Fi dongle to get connected to the internet over Wi-Fi. I'm going to be using a USB to Ethernet adapter to connect up to the network. I'll leave the exact model I'm using on screen here. So I'm going to be using that to get the console connected, because the inbuilt hardware for networking will not work currently, but hopefully we'll see support for that added soon. So with all of that out of the way, we can now finally get set up to run Linux on the PS5. Now, I will provide a pre-built image in the video description that you can just flash onto the USB drive without having to build it yourself. You can just skip to this timestamp if you want to just use the pre-built version. However, I recommend building it yourself because it allows you to get a more up-to-date version and also select a different distro to install. So building it yourself does give you more control. Okay, so to build the Linux distro yourself on Windows, we need to open up PowerShell. So search for PowerShell, right-click, run it as administrator, and we want to type in wsl-install, and that will install the Windows subsystem for Linux if it's not already installed. Then we can simply search for WSL in our search bar and open it. Now, when you first do this, it will probably ask you to create an account. If you've not already set this up before, you'll have to create a user account for this Linux instance. And then once that's done, you should be able to start entering commands once you've entered all the information. So now we can install Docker on it by copying all of these commands and then right-clicking to paste it in and press enter, and then enter your password, and that will install everything. And then once that's all installed, we should be then good to restart the Windows subsystem for Linux, which we can do again in PowerShell by typing in WSL --shutdown, and that will shut down the Windows subsystem for Linux. And now we can reopen it again, and that should be the environment all set up and ready. So now all we have to do is copy the last section of commands here, right-click to paste them in, and this is where you can change your distro. So you can change Ubuntu 2604 to a different distro, any one that is supported in the repo, like 2404 or Arch or Alpine or any other distros that are currently available. And then you can go ahead and press enter, and that will start building the distro. So now we just wait for this to complete. This Ubuntu image it's building is about 12 gigabytes, so it can take some time. So now that the installation is complete, we can type in explorer.exe space dot and press enter, and that will open up again the Windows Explorer in the same location, and we can go to the output folder, and this is where your built image file for Linux is. Now we can flash the image file to the USB drive using Etcher. Click on Flash from File and select the image file that we generated. Then select the target drive, which is going to be our USB drive. Make sure that you back up any data on the USB drive before doing this, and then you can go ahead and flash the image file to the USB and wait for this to complete. In order to be able to boot into Linux, we need to adjust some settings on the PS5, very similar to the way PS4 Linux works. So we're going to go into our system settings and HDMI. Make sure Enable HDMI Device Link is disabled. So make sure it is not enabled for HDMI device link. Make sure that HDCP remains enabled. If you had it disabled because you have a capture card, make sure it is enabled. Otherwise, you'll just get a black screen when booting into Linux. And go down to Power Saving Settings. We want Set Features Available in Rest Mode. And then from here, we want to make sure that we supply power to USB ports always. Make sure that is set to always, and we should be good to go there. This is also recommended, which you should already have this set if you followed my guides on how to jailbreak the console in the first place. But if you go into System and just make sure that under System Software Updates and Settings, that you have Download Update Files and Install Update Files both disabled. So those are the settings that are needed to get Linux running. So now we just need to run the jailbreak. So if you don't have that set up, we're just going to go into our network settings, set up an internet connection, press Options on your registered network, go to Advanced Settings, go down to DNS settings and make sure that's set to manual, and then set the primary DNS to 62.210.38.117, and then go ahead and click OK to get connected up to the network. Once you are connected, it will say it's not. It will say it failed, but it will be connected. Then we can go up to our user guide, of course, and run the user guide. And that should redirect us over to this page here, where we can go to Zekos UMTX2 host. If we select that option, we can then jailbreak the console from here. Now, if you've not got this set up or you're not able to get onto this page from the user guide, then I recommend checking out my full jailbreak tutorial on how to jailbreak the PS5 up to firmware 5.50, and that shows you how to fully set up this jailbreak. Obviously, I'm going on the assumption that you more or less already know how to set up the jailbreak. You've already got it set up here, so we're going to go ahead and run it here. And then down here, we have PS5 Linux Loader. So you want to make sure you plug in the USB drive that contains your Linux image on it. So plug that into one of the back USB ports or the USB-C ports at the front, but do not plug it into the USB Type-A port at the front. So either the USB-C port at the front or the two back USB Type-A ports. Those are the ports that can be used to boot Linux. And I'm going to go ahead and run Linux Loader. There we go. Welcome to Linux. Finish preparation. Please wait for the orange light to stop blinking. So when the console goes into rest mode, it starts blinking orange. You get the kind of amber or orange light that is blinking. You need to wait for that blinking to stop, so it's just a solid orange LED. And once you see that, it means it's fully entered rest mode, and you can then wake it up from rest mode, and it should boot into Linux. So I'm going to wake up the console. Now it should boot you into the distro within a few seconds. If you're stuck on a black screen or you have no signal, you can try things like unplugging the HDMI, plugging it back in, and doing Control-Alt-F7 and then Control-Alt-F1 on your keyboard. Sometimes I've had to do that several times back and forth before it regains a signal, but that could be because I'm using a capture card. You might not have that issue. So just like that, we're up and running with Linux on the PS5. So this is Ubuntu, of course. So I'm just going to go ahead and set this up. And the good thing about PS5 Linux versus PS4 Linux, you have to use distros that other people have prepared, and they usually preload a bunch of crap on there that you don't want with the wrong language and keyboard layout selected. This is a fresh install of Linux, so you can do a first-time setup and make sure everything is configured to your liking. So just go through the first-time setup, select your language, keyboard layout, time zone, create your login details, and adjust any other settings to your liking. Also plug in your network dongle or USB to Ethernet adapter to get the PS5 connected to the internet. I'm going to right-click and go into my desktop settings. Now this is running incredibly well. It's running at 4K on my display here at 60 Hz. So I'm going to go ahead and just scale this up to 200% so that it's easier for all of you guys to see everything I'm doing here. So we'll keep changes. And there we go. We are up and running. So you can see we have our wired connection. Now there's a few additional steps that we need to do just to make sure everything is configured properly. If we go into the settings up here, we want to go to the power settings and just make sure that automatic screen blanking is turned off. I believe that is the screensaver. Also power mode on balance to not power saving, because we don't want the screen to turn off after 5 minutes, which would, cause problems because apparently it's a bit glitchy at the moment. So we want to make sure that is turned off. We also want to install a couple of things in the terminal. If I right-click and open in terminal, and again, I'll just zoom in a little bit here, and we want to do sudo snap install Firefox. So we want to get Firefox installed first of all. So once we get Firefox installed, you can then open up Firefox, and we can use this to navigate to the project itself for PS5 Linux for the additional commands, which will be quite handy. So we just go to github.com/ps5-linux/ps5-linux-loader. And that should take us over to the repo from the flow. And here we get all of the commands that we were looking at before. So we also want to run this command here. We can just copy and paste it to refresh Mesa 2404. So we're going to paste that command in there and press enter and let that do its thing. And there we go. That is now refreshed. And finally, we also can clone the PS5 Linux tools directly to our Linux install as well. So that's Linux now fully installed to your external drive. Whenever you have that USB device plugged into your PS5 and you run the Linux load your payload, it will boot you into this operating system with everything that you've set up so far. So it is fully installed. However, if you want to install it to an M.2 drive, you can do that. So once you have it installed to a USB drive, you can then use this installation to then install it to your internal NVMe drive that's installed inside the PS5. Now, you cannot use the M.2 drive to store your PS4 and PS5 apps and also boot Linux. It's one or the other. So if you may use your M.2 drive for the Linux installation, make sure you offload any installed PS4 or PS5 apps that's currently on your M.2 drive back over to the system storage before doing this. So I'll quickly go over the steps needed to install Linux to the internal M.2 drive. However, if you're not using an M.2 drive and you're just booting from an external drive, as we have done up to this point, then just skip to the timestamp you see on screen here to move to the next section. So to install Linux to the internal drive, from what I found, it seems that you will still need the USB drive to boot into Linux, but the Linux installation will be stored on the internal M.2 drive. That seems to be how it works for the moment. Hopefully that can be changed to boot directly from the M.2 drive in the future, but it's still worth installing it because once you boot into the M.2 drive, you no longer need the USB drive. You can unplug it and have a free USB port plus the faster read and write speeds. So first you want to make sure you have a terminal window open that's in the same location as your PS5 Linux tools folder. And then from there, we can go ahead and copy the first set of commands and paste them in to the terminal and press enter. And that will set up the M.2 drive for Linux. Once it's done, it should say it was successful. And then you need to reboot the PS5 and load back up into PS5 Linux again. And then open up a terminal window in the same location again. And then once you've done the reboot, we can then go ahead and enter the next set of commands here. So we copy this set of commands and paste them in. So it says here, path to your image file. That is the path to the image file that we flashed to the USB drive. So you'll need to copy that over to PS5 Linux so that you can give it that location. So in my case, I copied it over to the downloads folder. So I'm just going to go ahead and enter the path to my Ubuntu image file. And then press enter, and that will install that image file onto your M.2 drive on the PS5. So once that's complete, we can then enter the file command here, which will boot us into that install on the M.2 drive. We paste it in, we press enter, and there we go. It now boots us in. Now for me, it didn't give me a signal when I first did this, so I had to unplug my HDMI cable, plug it back in, and then do Control-Alt F7 and Control-Alt F1 to refresh the HDMI signal so I was able to see the screen. But once I did that, I was then able to log in. And again, this is a fresh install, so you'll have to set up this install just as we did with the install that was on the USB drive. Go through the first time setup, do everything we did up to this point, and then you'll have the install on the M.2 drive ready. So that's how you get things installed. So I promise you we're nearly done with the installation steps. There's one final step to finalize the installation of the M.2 drive. So in order to configure things that happen on startup, we need to access the boot partition. Now we can figure out what partition that is by typing in lsblk-f. and that will list all of the partitions, and we can see here we have this vfat partition, FAT32, and it's got the label of boot. So that will be our boot partition, and it's on SDA2. So now that I know that, I can create a folder to mount it to. So I'm going to do mkdir boot, and that will create a boot folder on my desktop. And then I'll type in sudo mount /dev/sda2 space boot, and that will mount it in that folder. And there we go. If I open up the boot folder, these are our boot parameters. Now to make it bootleg straight from the M.2 drive, we need to edit the cmdline.txt file here and change the root label equals Ubuntu 2604 and just add -m2 to the end. And that means whenever you boot Linux, it will automatically boot it straight into the M.2 drive, the installation on the M.2 drive, instead of the one on the USB drive. And you can go ahead and save that. Obviously, don't do that if you are booting from the USB. You can also edit your vram.txt file here. So this number is a hexadecimal number that represents the number of bytes that is allocated as video memory. It's only 512 megabytes right now because it uses dynamic allocation, which basically means it will give more memory to the GPU when it requests it, essentially. So that's why it's a pretty low amount of VRAM. However, sometimes certain games might not recognize that and will not allow you to adjust the settings because it thinks you don't have enough VRAM installed. So if you're running into any issues like that with certain games, you can change this here, like add an extra 0 to this number, and that will change it so that it's 8 gigabytes dedicated to the GPU with 8 gigabytes of memory left over for the CPU. And that's kind of a good ratio that you can use as well if you are running into any issues with VRAM allocation. So that's another option. But if you're not running into any problems when running your games, I would just leave it as it is. So that's all we need to do there, so we can close out of that and then type in sudo umount /dev/sda2, and that unmounts that partition. So when we load Linux again, it will boot us straight into the M.2 installation if, of course, you have it installed there. So now we can start testing some games. I'm going to install a bunch of emulators. I'll also install Steam with sudo snap install Steam to get Steam installed onto our PS5, can install some PC games, and really get a feel for how good Linux is on the PS5. What kind of performance can we get? What kind of games are we actually able to load under Linux? That is what we want to find out here. Okay, so it took me a while to download a bunch of emulators and Steam and get everything installed and ready. So I've got a few different things that I think should be some interesting tests to run here on the PS5. So the first game I thought I would run here is Resident Evil Requiem. Reason being, this game we cannot run on jailbroken PS5s yet, on the PS5's operating system with the PS5 version, because of course it requires a higher firmware than the firmwares that jailbroken consoles are running to be able to actually run it and dump it. So unfortunately, we can't run it on the PS5 normally, but with Linux, we should be able to just run the PC version, if it's powerful enough to be able to handle it, of course. So this is what we're testing here. So I picked a pretty heavy spot where we're outside. So there is quite a few things to render, lots of stuff to render in the distance. So this should be a pretty good test. And you can see that we are getting sort of the high 50s, which is pretty impressive considering the fact that I am running this currently at 4K resolution, probably using like upscaling and stuff to be able to achieve this. So it is running close to 60 FPS here at 4K. It definitely doesn't feel super smooth, but it is running up into the 50s, which is pretty good. So there is something that you can do to squeeze a little bit more performance, and that is to enable a slight overclock. And now I believe this is the same overclock that the PlayStation 5 does naturally when on the PS5 operating system when running games. It will apply a slight overclock, so you can manually apply this overclock if you want to push the CPU and GPU a little bit higher. So in the installation steps, you have this fan and boost control option. All you have to do is open up a terminal window, again in the same location that has your PS5 Linux tools folder. Make sure you have that folder there, and you'll be able to enable this. So it boosts the CPU to 3500 MHz and the GPU to 2230 MHz, so a fair chunk higher than their default options. So what you want to do is just copy the entire section of code here and paste it into the terminal. You definitely want to do all of them, so the fan on and the boost on option. Never apply this overclock without the fan increase as well. So you want both commands, the PS5 control fan on and boost on. So we just copy the entire section of code, which will apply both of them. It will increase the fan speed and apply the boost. And then we just go ahead and press enter, and that applies it. And I can hear my PS5 getting louder there when I enable that, so the fan has kicked up higher. And if we go back into the game though, not really noticing a huge difference in the frame rate, but generally I'm only noticing a 1 or 2 FPS increase compared to what we were getting previously. But that is how you apply the overclock, so the game is definitely playable here, Resident Evil Requiem, at 1440p and 1080p even more so. You'll be able to play this game, so it runs just fine here on the PS5. So moving on to the next game, now this one is a little bit of an interesting one. So this is Helldivers 2, because another thing that PS5 Linux allows you to do is run games online without a PSN subscription. You can play online with other people, and Helldivers 2, of course, is a game that simply you cannot run at all without an internet connection. You need to be able to play online to access this game, so I went ahead and tried this. Now, first of all, I noticed some issues, definitely some issues with this particular title. Now, whether this is an issue with Proton or an issue more to do with the PS5's GPU drivers, because there's definitely a lot of visual artifacts in this game, and as you can see in the game, it does run fine, like the frame rate is high enough, it is playable. This game is already quite demanding on some lower tier systems, but what you'll notice is visual artifacts, particularly if you pay attention to the skybox. You can see that there is some visual artifacts in the skybox, some black boxes appearing, which obviously should not happen. So whether that's an issue with the PS5 GPU, or whether that's an issue with the way, the Proton implementation is with this particular game under Linux, but yeah, that definitely shouldn't look like that, so not entirely sure what's going on there. Definitely a weird one. But one game that is running remarkably well here is Halo the Master Chief Collection. I had to do it. I had to run Halo on a PS5. It wouldn't be right to not run Halo on PS5 Linux. So Halo MTC, and this game runs incredibly well. It is a much older game, of course, but this runs incredibly well. I'm able to actually run this at native resolution, which is 4K, so this is running at 4K with the highest settings enabled, so highest graphics setting. So I'm running Halo Reach here, and you can see no slowdown whatsoever. It's basically a rock-solid 60 FPS experience, which is fantastic. And I even went ahead and hopped into some online games and played some, custom games as well with other players, so that you can see there that it is all running just fine. Again, maxed out settings, no issues whatsoever with that game. So this is the big advantage of running Linux on your PS5, is that not only can you access PC games and games that are not available on the PS5 like Halo, but you can also play games online without a PSN subscription, play with other people, and you also have the option to play games that are not playable on the PS5 currently because the PS5 version of that particular game requires a higher firmware to run, and they're not loadable on jailbroken consoles that are running older firmwares, whereas you can just play the PC version of the game instead and still be able to play that title. That's the other big advantage, but there's one more big advantage, of course, which is emulation. We can run games from other consoles now with emulation. First one I'm trying here is RPCS3, which of course is the PlayStation 3 emulator. I have the Ratchet & Clank Tools of Destruction installed. We're going to go ahead and run this and see if it actually runs and if it's playable. First thing is that the cutscenes don't seem to have any issues whatsoever. Cutscenes are running just fine. But when we get into the game, there is a little bit of stuttering and slowdowns here and there, but for the most part, I would say it is playable. I'm able to play the game, and it does seem to be running okay. It's just every now and then there's some stutters here and there. Of course, that could be shader compilation stutters potentially, and not an issue with the PS5 being unable to run the game, because for the most part, it seems to be running just fine, as you can see here. So it looks like PS3 games are playable with PS5 under Linux. The other one I wanted to try was Xenia. So there is Xenia Edge, which is kind of a Linux port of Xenia to try and run Xbox 360 games under Linux. So I went ahead and tried this one as well. I loaded up Trapdown, which I believe is still an Xbox 360 exclusive. But once I did get into the game, it did seem to be running okay initially. But once we started to get into sort of more demanding scenes with lots of enemies on screen, it definitely had noticeable slowdown. I wasn't able to get a performance counter on this one, but it's definitely dropping below 60 FPS, so I wouldn't really say it's playable right now, but obviously this is only one game. You would have to try many other Xbox 360 games. I'm sure there will be some with less demanding graphics that are likely to be playable, but this one definitely I would not consider playable at the moment with the current performance. I did also want to try a Switch emulator. Unfortunately, there was some issue preventing Ryujinx from running. and I didn't really have enough time to troubleshoot it to try and get it fixed in time for the video, so unfortunately, I will have to leave that to maybe another time trying some Switch emulation. So now that we have the distro fully set up, we have the option to turn it into a Steam machine for a more appropriate console experience. So if we go back into the settings and select the Apps section, and then scroll down to Steam and enable the Auto Start feature for the application, and then we can scroll down further to the System Settings and User Settings, and unlock the user account and enable the auto login on startup function for our user account. And then finally, if we open Steam in big picture mode, we can then go into the Steam settings, scroll down to interface, and enable big picture on startup. Now our Linux install is more like a console, as we can switch back to the PS5 operating system from within here by pressing the PS button on my controller and selecting restart, which will reboot the console back into the PS5's operating system. So now we can play our PS5 and PS4 games as normal, but whenever we want to play some PC games or play some games online, we can simply load up our jailbreak page again and wait a few seconds for the jailbreak to load, and then simply select the Linux loader payload to get us booted back into Linux. And once we do boot into Linux, it will auto-launch Steam Big Picture mode and sign us in automatically, where we will be able to just immediately use our PS5 controller to select any of our PC games to play from here. So now you have basically a PS5 and a Steam machine on the same device, which is fantastic. So that is kind of the big benefit here of running Linux on your PS5. You have effectively a low to mid-range gaming PC now that you can access on your PS5, as well as being able to use it as a normal PS5 that can run PS4 and PS5 games too, which is awesome. So huge thanks to the Flow for making this possible. I was beginning to think that Linux would never eventually come out for the PS5. It seemed like it was maybe going to be an impossibility, but the Flow was able to make it happen, and I'm so glad that he was. So anyway, that's going to do it here for this video, so hope you guys enjoyed this one or found the information useful. If you did, please like